woke up on December 23rd, 2015, frigid, with a coat of frost covering the inside of the tent. Every time we moved, the frost flakes off and snows down on top of us. We're at 18,000 feet at Camp 2 on Aconcagua, South America's highest peak. We'd been stuck here for 2 days already, and we had at least another day before we climb again. Outside, the temperature sits at about 10 below, and the wind is whipping at about 50 to 60 miles an hour. Inside of our tent, my climbing partner Rob Marshall and I are cocooned in 6 inches of down stuffing inside of our sleeping bags, with just our faces poking out. This is equally one of the most miserable days of my life, and one of the most fun. The next day, one of our climbing crew who'd been suffering a severe headache and a debilitating nausea decides to turn back. Her altitude sickness had gotten worse overnight instead of getting better as we had all hoped. So when she headed down to base camp, we went up to Camp 3 and 20,000 feet. We didn't sleep that night. We rose around midnight to eat our breakfast of stale crackers and stale dry cereal. We left our tent at about 1 o'clock. But even with a high level of exertion, some of the fanciest climbing gear, we still struggle to keep warm. The sun rises at about 6 a.m., but on the other side of the mountain. So we can see the sun's rays hitting the peaks all around us, but we still stay in the mountain shadow for another 3 hours. We'd expected cold, but nothing like this. It's an interesting thing about the mountains is they're very seasonal. In December in the northern hemisphere, nobody's above 18,000 feet. The conditions are just too harsh and they would perish pretty quickly. Where we're at on Aconcagua is in the southern hemisphere. And we were currently hitting the front side of a 2 to 3 month weather window in which Aconcagua was able to be climbed. This also happens to be one of the 7 summits of the world. So we had our work cut out for it, to say the least. Well, after months of training and planning, and 16 days of climbing, we stood 22,838 feet on the summit. And for a brief moment, each of us was the highest human being alive on the planet. I'm here to talk about climbing. Climbing a mountain is actually quite simple. A lot of people will dismiss it, but really if you break it down, it's doable. You gotta have the right perspective on the climb. You gotta train for it. We have to work for it. And we have to have a good team. But the actual act of climbing a mountain is really quite simple. And I'm going to show you. Are you ready? You missed it, didn't you? I'll show you again, but this time I'll slow it down. There it is. Putting one foot in front of the other. It's really that simple. Moving forward, always moving forward, being further ahead than we were 10 minutes ago, 10 hours ago, 10 days ago. On a mountain, we're either climbing or we're freezing to death. Nobody's going to carry us to the top, but it's really quite simple as long as we break it down. The first thing that we need to do is get perspective on our challenge. A lot of people dismiss mountain climbing as impossible, saying, I could never do that. Could never. More accurately, will never. But do we really mean never? American culture has really let our language run rampant. We use intensely inflammatory words to describe mundane things. Comedian Louis C.K. does a great bit about this, about how Americans go for the top shelf words right away. Like, dude, that was amazing. Really? You were amazed? You were amazed by a basket of chicken wings? I have a migraine. Really? Are you unable to be exposed to even a pinprick of light? Are you vomiting? Are you hallucinating? You might just have a bad headache. My personal favorite, I'm dehydrated. I'll probably thirsty. As we sit here tonight, we're all going to be taking down notes about ideas that we want to implement in our lives and in our organizations. Now, some of these things are going to make the list, and others are going to be dismissed, claiming to be impossible. Well, we can either change our goals or we can change our circumstances to make those goals possible. Let's take a simple, everyday mountain, like losing weight. Ugh, that's such a mountain. Ever say that? I did. In fact, a year before I climbed my first mountain, I was 240 pounds, a 2-pack-a-day smoker. I couldn't climb to a third-floor apartment without trying to catch my breath for 2 to 3 minutes, let alone even run a quarter mile. Well, I decided to start making some changes in my life. I went to the gym, started watching what I ate. I quit drinking soda. The weight was falling off of me. And the more weight I lost, the more ability I discovered I had. You see, I was never athletic in school, never good at sports. I was never even really all that coordinated. But as I continued my journey, a friend of mine was planning a trip to Mount Ranier, and I asked him if I could tag along, and if he thought I could do it. He said, yeah. I signed up. I lost more weight. I went to the gym when I was tired. I went to the gym when I was bored. I find every resource I can to try to learn about mountain climbing. And when I got on the plane at 180 pounds, down from 240 less than a year before. And when we flew into Seattle, you can see Mount Ranier in the distance. And it wasn't until then that I had actually realized I had never seen a mountain before. We got to the top of Mount Ranier in 2 days of doing nothing more than putting one foot in front of the other. And in that moment, my entire perspective changed. Suddenly, big problems are not that big anymore. Have a bad day? Not a big deal. Flat tire? Who cares? I had had a literal mountain in front of me that seemed nearly impossible. It took up my entire field of view. But in just 2 days of concentrated effort and doing nothing more than putting one foot in front of the other, we were standing on top of it. Now, a lot of people will look at mountain climbing and dismiss it. But it is very doable with the right effort. We could never get there if we didn't train for it, though. When I start training, I'll put a 25-pound in my backpack, put in my headphones, and I'll start on the stair climber for about 60 minutes. Over time, I'll eventually work that up to a 75-pound backpack, doing the stair climber for 90-minute stretches at an average step rate of 60 steps a minute, and I'll do that 4 to 5 times a week. Now, when I tell a new climber this, they tend to turn a little green, and you can almost watch them go through similar to the stages of grief. And they say, okay, so cardio, okay. Well, what about swimming? Well, I always ask them, what part of the mountain is going to be swum? When we choose our own mountains, we need to train specifically for what it is that we want to do. American climber Ed Viesturs said it best when he said, there are no shortcuts to the top. There is no easy way for the summit. So if you want to do something, you've got to do it. If you want to be a concert violinist, you have to push yourself or find somebody to push you to be faster and cleaner than the last time. If you want to be a great leader, you have to find every book, find every resource you can to actually be a great leader. And when you're going through this, it's going to be hard work, and it's going to hurt. And you may suffer, but that's okay, because learning to suffer can lead to heightened types of fun. That's right, fun. There's actually 3 different types of fun. Type 1 fun is here and now. So think of riding in a convertible, being out with friends and family, or going to a concert. It's generally short-lived and easily attained, but once it's done, it's done. Type 2 fun is fun that's not necessarily fun in the moment, but fun immediately after. Think of skydiving. Type 3 fun. Type 3 fun is when you need weeks or months of time in between the event and now to really appreciate it. And type 3 fun is difficult to explain to non-climbers. But when climber George Mallory was interviewed, he said, when asked, what's the use of climbing Mount Everest? I must immediately reply, it is of no use. There is not the slightest prospect of gain whatsoever. All we hope to get out of this adventure is just sheer joy. And joy is, after all, the end of life. To the outsider, the path to the summit may look miserable. But to the person going through it, it's type 3 fun. Whenever I look back at a hard-fought climb, the pain of the moment has long been forgotten. And all that's left is the exhilaration of an accomplishment that lasts a lifetime. It may not be fun eating ice cream whenever you want, but it sure is fun taking your shirt off at the beach. And it may not be fun training and studying while others are out enjoying themselves, but trust me, it's a lot of fun accomplishing goals that others barely dream of. We can never do this without a team, though. We climb in a team to serve many functions, such as distribution of gear, delegation of camp duties, but most importantly, we climb in a team to help keep us safe and to help us all reach the summit. When life is literally on the line, you have to make some very real choices. If I fall, I need to know that my teammates can stop that fall. And if my teammates fall, they need to know that we together will drop, anchor in to stop that fall and protect the team. We need to evaluate who we have around us. Who is on our team? Who are we there to help? Who is there to help us? And is there anybody on our team that might be holding us back from the summit? Now, that's a very unfortunate, but a very real question that we need to ask. Is there anybody on our team who might be keeping us from our goals? Step 4 of the 12-step program is to make a fearless moral inventory. And this is so important that it's largely repeated in step 10 when they say, make a continued moral inventory. We need to take an inventory of who we choose to rope up with every day in our lives and in our organizations. Is there anybody there who might be holding us back from the summit? And if there is, are we going to be fearless, or are we going to be the nicest person on the bottom of the mountain? When we're choosing our rope team, we need to make sure that we're going to have people around us that are going to help keep us safe and help get us all to the summit. The people that we can choose to trust with our lives. On Kilimanjaro, Rob Marshall and I were again on a team. We'd been on the mountain for 5 days, and I think it rained every day since we had gotten there. And every night for dinner, we had tea, either green or yellow soup, and hot dogs. And every morning for breakfast, we had tea and more hot dogs. So when we left our tent on summit morning, we were fueled again by tea and hot dogs. As we climb, we get a little bit more miserable by the step. And we'll randomly shout to each other, "How you doing?" And the response is usually, "Ugh." Not even a word, just a noise. To me, this always served as an affirmation. An affirmation between friends that it's okay to feel the way that I do, and a reassurance that we're still there for each other. As we neared the summit on Kilimanjaro, it was still very dark, and not surprisingly, very cold. We were in the middle of Africa, surrounded by rainforest, but it was 2 vertical miles below us. We were layered up in all the fanciest climbing gear, but we still struggled to stay cold. We still hurt. We're still tired. We reached the summit of Kilimanjaro about a half an hour before the sun came up. We took our obligatory photos by the sign and then stayed for a little while to revel in our accomplishment. And although we should have been heading down, we decided to stay just a bit longer. And as the sun broke the horizon, the clouds were just perfect, and the colors were so incredibly vivid. The scene was amazing. It was even more amazing than a basket of chicken wings. Our team is currently training for a spring climb of Denali. And if that goes well, we'll be using that as an assessment for a potential 2019 or 2020 Everest expedition. Now, these are both massive undertakings, but we've got the right perspective on it. We're going to train for it. We're going to work for it. And we know we've got a great team. I watched the sunrise from 19,341 feet over Africa. And a couple years later, I was the highest human being alive on the planet. I've climbed 15 high-altitude peaks across 4 continents and 6 countries. I accomplished all of this by doing nothing more than putting one foot in front of the other. Nobody's going to carry us to our summits, but we can do it. We just need to keep moving forward. Thank you.